Okay, so before we get started today, I wanted to kind of walk through file organization and how best to sync up your files and make sure your various files are saved while you're working on the remote desktop at DVC. So I've gone ahead and what you see right now is the DVC remote desktop. I know you guys are familiar with logging in already, but this is something that's kind of important, and I'm taking it to the next level as we enter assignment 205 and we start working on our final project, and specifically today when we start to have multiple files and use block references. So going forward, this is the kind of thing that becomes important. So like I said before, we want to make sure that we log into the remote desktop, the idm.dvc.edu, through the client. And so I have the desktop client running, and I want to show a few things as we get started in Rhino. I've gone ahead and I've opened up Rhino, so I have an instance of Rhino that's already open, but I want to talk a little bit more about the file structure. If I go to the Windows menu and I go ahead and open up the Documents folder, there it is. I'm working locally on a Mac, and so when I log into the remote desktop, when we come down here, you can see that my computer is listed. This is at the bottom. It's below quick access. If we look at this PC here, we come down here. This Grant Adams on Grant's MacBook Drive X happens to be my actual MacBook Pro. That's my hard drive on my MacBook Pro. Now I also have an external hard drive plugged into the computer. Actually, I have two plugged in right now. One is called Black Tea. That's listed and available to me under Drive Y. And the last one is Boot Camp, and that's listed as Drive Z. Those are both external drives plugged into my MacBook Pro. Now I could go ahead and click on my computer itself, and then I could go into my, in this case I have my file stored in OneDrive, and I could go to today's exercise if I wanted to. But instead of doing that, I want to show you something else. And this would work certainly if we were logging in for a short period of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, we wanted to do something quickly, then working on a file directly from my home desktop would be not a problem. But when we start to work for a longer period of time, we sit down for a couple-hour modeling session, we're sitting down to do the assignment 205 or get started on that today. In those scenarios, it makes sense to kind of set up a folder that's syncing. And I'm going to use OneDrive as an example. And again, this is not something that I'm going to do on a short-term basis. It's a long-term basis. And if I lose the connection, I'm going to lose whatever I'm working on. However, with OneDrive running, it should being the key phrase here, keep my files saved and backed up and synced going forward. So that's the idea behind this. So let me go ahead and show you this process before we get started with today's exercise. I'm going to go ahead and click on that little arrow down by the clock in the lower right corner here, and it turns out that OneDrive is not showing for me. That's not good. Let me go ahead and search for OneDrive, see if I can get it to start up again. There we go. Let's go ahead and click on that OneDrive desktop app. There we go. It should show up down here as a cloud with a slash through it. For some reason on this particular computer it wasn't showing up right away, but now that it's showing up, we're good to set this up. So when we get the Setup OneDrive dialog box here, you want to enter your Insight email address. So I'm going to go ahead. Mine's a little bit different than yours because I'm faculty. Mine's at email.4cd.edu. Yours is insight.4cd.edu, so it's a little bit different. I'll go ahead and click on Sign In here. And when I do that, it's going to ask me to set it up. You're going to be working on a work or school account, so I'll click on Work or School. That is, of course, assuming that you're using OneDrive with your 25 free gigs of space that's provided to you by the school. This is where I need to enter my password. I'm going to copy it and paste it in. And then I'll go ahead and click on Sign In. There it is. Now, if we were in person, I'd be talking to you about changing your folder location to be a flash drive or a hard drive. In our case, we're just storing it directly on the computer itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. There we go. Now, in this case, I've already synced it once, so it's going to ask me to either use the folder or choose a new folder. I'll go ahead and use the folder. That's fine. That's a leftover from my earlier lecture. Now, backing up my folders, I don't want to back up any one of these folders. So I'm going to uncheck all three of those and click on the Skip button here. It says get to know your OneDrive. All of this is just fine. We'll just keep kicking next through it. Now this brings up a good point. So the way OneDrive works is we can keep files directly on a device. we can keep them always available on the device, or we can do an online only where it just downloads them as we need them. This is the key here. We're only going to be working in this online only mode, except for the folder that we're working on. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Next, and then I'll click Later, and we'll go ahead and open my OneDrive. Now, as soon as the OneDrive opens, before we do anything else, I want to select everything in this folder. So I'll press Control-A, if it'll let me do it. No, it won't. I'll click on the first and then hold down Shift and click on the last so that I have everything selected here. I will right-click and I will choose this Free Up Space option. What that's doing is that free up space is saying keep everything on the computer, or excuse me, keep everything on my OneDrive in the cloud, not on the computer. So it's going to take a little bit of time to apply this setting. It has to go through all the files that are in your OneDrive. I have a lot that I sync to OneDrive. So it'll take a little bit of time. It may hang for a little bit. It did for me earlier today, where in this last little bit it hung. If that's the case, just bear with it for a little bit. And there we go, it did finish. It took about a minute to do that, so I've cut a little bit of time out of the video so that you guys don't have to sit and wait and watch me do that. But I wanted to point that out because it may take you a little bit of time to sync. Now that I've gone ahead and I've done that and I've said keep everything in the cloud, I'm going to go ahead and go into my folder structure. I'll go into 136. Now I have a folder that's called Assignment 205 Artist's Retreat. This is where I'm going to store everything that has to do with Assignment 205. And this is really convenient because if I have this folder, every time that I go and log in and set up my OneDrive, remember you'll have to do this each time you log into one of the school computers, I can choose just to download this one folder, not the rest of my stuff. So I'll click on this folder, I'll right click on it, and I'm going to come down here and say always keep on this device. Now when I do that, everything in that folder is going to be saved on this computer locally, which is going to make everything much faster. So if I come in here now, I don't have a folder yet for this, this semester, but if I were to come in here, right there, I have my master site file. This is again from the fall of 2019. There's my master site file. That'll be downloaded and kept on this computer and kept updated. You can see that it's updating right here. So as I work, each time that I save, including the backup files, each time it creates a backup file, they're going to be automatically uploaded into my OneDrive. Thereby preserving and making sure that I don't accidentally lose anything. So it's a great way of keeping yourself backed up. It's a little bit cumbersome to set up because each time you log in or each time you get kicked off and have to come back into the remote desktop at DVC, you have to set it up. But if you do it that way, you have a much lesser chance of losing files, and everything that you need is going to be kept locally. So you see that I have a folder for my materials. I will have a folder for block references. Those will all show up right here in that Artist's Retreat folder. And then each time I go to work on it in Rhino, it'll be in the same location, which is another important thing for our renderings. So the other half of this, though, is once I'm done working on my files, how do I disconnect from OneDrive and kind of finish the session before actually logging off or closing the remote desktop? Now, of course, there are going to be times where the remote desktop crashes or kicks you out, etc., in which case, hopefully, everything's been backed up and synced to OneDrive so you won't lose anything. But in the case now, or at least in my demonstration here, I want to assume for the moment that I've actually finished working in this particular session. I need to move on and do something else, so I want to disconnect from the remote desktop machine. So in that case, first thing I want to do is come down by the clock here, click the up arrow, and make sure that I can look at my OneDrive and that my OneDrive is up to date. If it's not up to date, that could present a problem because not all of my files have finished syncing. So in that case, you want to make sure it finishes syncing before you actually disconnect. So in my case, right here in this demonstration, the OneDrive folder is up to date. That's what I'm looking for. Now that it's up to date, I'm going to come down and click on the Help and Settings button. And instead of just clicking on Closing OneDrive, I want to actually go to the Settings menu here. And I'll click on Settings. And right there, I'm going to click on this Unlink PC. And this is actually going to disconnect this remote desktop from your OneDrive folder. So I'll go ahead and click on Unlink this PC. Yes, go ahead and unlink my account. And this takes a little bit of time. And again, you would only do this after everything has been synced correctly. And we should be able to come down here, and it's going to take a minute to make sure that the sync has finished. It's currently signing out, and yep, there we go. Now it's signed out. Once that's done, I can close all of my folders, and I can go ahead and disconnect from the remote desktop right there. I could also click up here in the little power cord button and disconnect from the client as well. All right, onward we go. So today is exercise 219, and I'm not under any illusions that you guys will finish everything that I have on this double-sided sheet. I know this is a lot, but it's also kind of the day where we get our building into the site. And I really want to focus on making sure that you get your building into the site. And then, of course, your building is going to keep evolving. I'm not saying that your building has to be fixed. In fact, most of you will evolve your building until the very, very end of the semester. So we're just trying to get stuff set up so that we can start to do preliminary renderings. So we will establish a view today of an exterior. We'll try to get some of the materials in. Even if your building's just kind of masked out, or maybe it's missing some windows, or it's not quite fully evolved, that's okay. We're just trying to get those pieces so that as we evolve it, you can always go back and perform another exterior render and improve upon what we have. So I went ahead and I pulled up assignment 205, and I went back and I re-downloaded the zip file at the end. A lot of you already downloaded it, which is great, because that has some information about the sites in it. It also has, if I extract it here, it also has 2 SketchUp files that we can use to bring in some site data for this particular site. I flip back and forth on this as to whether I'm working on the coast or whether I'm working on the mountains. I try to give you guys both. Last semester, I think I put the building in the mountains, so this semester I'll put it on the coast, just so that you guys have perspective on what we're trying to do. So first thing I'll do is I'm going to create a file. This is a brand new Rhino file that will be just the building site. So this is going to be the site, and then I'm going to bring as a block reference my retreat into the site. So it's important that we do it in that order. And so on this brand new file, I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Save As so that I can save it. And I'll put it on my flash drive. And let's see here. Lo and behold, we need a new folder for this semester. And I'm going to call this file master site. And we'll add a fall of 2019 on that. And I'll go ahead and click on save. So this master site is going to be where I'm going to perform my renderings, and it's going to be the kind of the catch-all for everything. Everything's going to end up being in here. This is where I'll do the rendering work, do the lighting, etc. So I'm going to bring in first. I'm going to bring in the terrain. So I'll go to File and then Import. I'm going to go to my flash drive. Actually, I'm going to go to my Downloads folder. That's where I saved the assignment 204. I think it was Site 2 was the coast, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that one in. I'm going to bring it in as a mesh. Go ahead and say OK. And let me zoom out a little bit. Yep, good. I was just making sure that I had the correct site here. There it is. There's the SketchUp file. Just like I did back when we were doing the SketchUp terrain stuff, I'm going to convert this into a NURB surface, so we'll go through the same process here. I'm going to give myself a layer called SketchUp, and I will put all of this on the SketchUp layer. Like that, perfect. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. On this layer, I'm going to call it Environment. And I'll create a sublayer for terrain. And that's where I'm going to end up putting my NURB surface. So as we did before, let me go ahead and switch this into shaded mode so we can see it. That piece can be hidden for now, so I'm going to type hide so that it goes away. And then I'm going to slice this one up using my contours in the U and the V. So I'll go ahead and type, let me do a temporary sublayer for contours. I'm going to do them all on one layer. So contour, I need to turn on my vertex snap. We'll start there. We're going to go straight in the X direction here. I'll do it at 100 feet. And it needs to be a little tighter than that. I'll try it at 75 feet. That looks a little better. And remember, I'm going to contour the surface only. And we're going to go in this direction this time. Same 75 feet. I can then turn off the SketchUp layer, and it leaves me with just my grid. These guys, I need to, sorry, my OpenGL is still on, so let me change that under Options, and then View. Turn off that GPU tessellation. Now I can see everything, that's good. I'll switch into the top view. I need to do that trim that I did last time. I'm going to make it a little easier on myself and do it from those 2 points. Sorry about that. There we go. We'll go ahead and type trim. And I'll go through all of those. Let me make this big so I can see it a little bit better. There we go. And I've got all those done. Oops, missed a few more here. All right, so I've got those all trimmed. I'll select the grid here. Then I'm going to go up to surface, curve network. There it is. I get my 4 points. We'll go ahead and press enter, and it'll build my curve network. This always takes a little bit of time. It's always hard to be patient and wait for this kind of stuff. Once it does its curve network, I'm going to rebuild the surface, but I have to wait until it's finished. All right, there we go. So I'm going to deselect. I'll click one time on this square. It's going to turn yellow because of the density of that. And I will type rebuild. And I'll do it 200 by 200 to start. There we go. The U and the V are going to be 200 by 200. All right, now it starts to be workable. I'm going to go ahead and change that onto the terrain layer. So we'll change object onto the terrain layer. We can look at it, hopefully, in the perspective view. It's still thinking. Perfect. We can turn off the contour layer. SketchUp's already off. And there is my terrain. I thought I changed this. Correct that. All right. So now I have my bit of terrain. The importance of doing this is once we convert it to a NURB surface, integrating my building onto this site is going to be a lot easier. So I've kind of pre-scouted this site. I think either this little shoulder in there is pretty good or this shoulder in there is pretty good for my building. So I'm going to put it on one of those two locations because I think that's going to be the best for what I'm trying to do. I'm going to go ahead and bring that in. I'm going to go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And so the key here is that I need to go find that site, or the model that I started building my retreat in. I'm going to go ahead and open that model up first so that we can take a look at it, make sure it's ready. Let me go into my folder. There's that retreat base. My computer is running so slow today. I apologize. All right, there it is. I'm missing a bunch of stuff. This was my file from last class, so I'll have to work through what the issues were. But I'm going to go ahead and do a save as and drop this into today's folder. And this is going to be called the retreat base. I'll click save. Perfect. I'm going to have to work through all the materials in a little bit. So let me jump back over into the master site file, and I'm going to go get that retreat base file. I'm not looking for a SketchUp. I'm looking for a Rhino model. There it is. And I'll go ahead and say open. I'm going to bring it in as a linked block definition, and I'm going to do it as a reference layer setup. So it's going to be linked as a reference. I'll say OK. I'll say OK again. And now it comes to actually sitting my building down into the terrain. Oh, looks like I've got a bunch of issues to solve there. There it is. Oops, I hit return too many times. All right, let me try that one more time. I apologize. Blocks, insert block instance. Linked as a reference. Come on. And there it is. So as I start to try to place this, the placing of it is rather challenging. So let me go ahead and I'll stick it approximately where I think it needs to go. Maybe like that. Let me hit escape for a second. So it ends up being too low. It's too far down in my space. There it is on the underside of my terrain. So I'm going to move this V for vertical, and I'll pull it up so that it starts to be shown. So there it is. I built this file. Let me go ahead and zoom selected so we can see a little bit closer at it. I built this file to kind of sit and nestle into the side of the hill. So it has a little staircase, etc. So I can move this maybe like that. Let's move it a little bit more like that. Then I'm going to have to sink this down again. So let's move it, V for vertical, and I'll drop this in. There it is, actually intersecting the terrain a little bit. Now, I have to make this fit within the context of my model. So the hill is going to intersect the model in a variety of places. I've extended the ground, the foundation way down on one side. I just have a long wall. This needs to be just a little bit higher to work. Move, V for vertical, just a bit. And now that upper little balcony, a little higher. Now that fits kind of on the site there. Okay, that seems like it will work. It's kind of hanging on the side of the cliff. I wanted it in that context. Now, if you wanted it yours up toward the top where it wasn't so much slope, that's fine. Both of these sites have the cliff portion and they have the flat portion. So you really have a lot of flexibility in terms of where you place it. So now that I have this kind of installed or placed into my scene here, I have to work through some of the issues. So first off, the terrain flows right through my building. So I need to be able to cut the terrain out for where the building is. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll work in the top view. It's usually easiest to work in the top view. So let me select it, and then I'll do zoom selected so that I'm looking right down at it. And I'll do a polyline that goes all the way around my building. So I'll start at the outermost corners. Let me make sure my end snap is on here. And I'm going to draw a line that goes to the outside edges of my building. Come on. And sometimes you have to work in all directions here. So I'm looking for, oh, come on. It's doing a terrible job of snapping for me. Come on, start snapping. There we go. There. And then I can keep going. Oh, that didn't. You know, you love this when you do these kinds of things like, oh yeah, you just do it this way, and this way, and it works out just fine. And then, of course, when I try to do it live in front of you, it doesn't work at all. There. So all I'm trying to do is walk all the way around the outside of my building. And then I'll go ahead and close it. And that gives me this line here, which goes around the outside of my building. But in space here, it looks a little funky. That's okay though, because I'm going to use in the top view, I'll take this line and I'll project it so that it ends up on this surface. And as soon as I project it, you can see that that's become the area that I can trim out to represent my building. So now that I have that, then I can go ahead and type trim, and we can get rid of that piece of the terrain that goes through my building itself. So that's a good first step. We got rid of that part of the terrain. The next step, though, is I needed to somehow solve how this area was going to be incorporated. And so for me, I wanted the slope to kind of soften out as it gets closer to this little retaining wall, as opposed to staying quite so steep. So I want to adjust the slope a little bit. Part of the reason that I chose to set this one up was so that you guys could see how you can adjust the terrain as necessary. So what I need is first the intersection between this block here and where this surface would be. I need a little line right there. Because this is a block, I'm going to get a bunch of intersections, so it gets a little messy. So I'm going to temporarily create a layer that I can work on. I'll call this construction. The idea here is that that layer I can ultimately delete. So that's on. I'm going to go ahead and take the terrain and the building itself. I'll type intersect. Which will give me a bunch of little intersecting lines. It's taking too long. I'll do it by hand. So essentially what I need is I need a line that starts at my building and that comes across to where I might want the terrain to alter. So we'll say right about there. Then I'll use this line in the top view here, and I'll project it onto that surface. So now I have a line that's on the surface. I can delete that line. If I spin around here, I can get the intersection point between this line and that surface of my block. So again, I'll type, well, I'm going to go ahead and create another plane so I don't have to spend so much time watching this. There we go. That's just a temporary little surface that I can intersect with this point right there. And I'll type intersect. And that'll give me that point right there. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my point snap, and then I'll start with a polyline right at that point. Making sure I'm snapping to that point. I'll come over here, and I actually want to turn off intersection and turn on perpendicular, so I snap to that perpendicular. I'm going to come around here, and I'll snap to that perpendicular. And then I'll go ahead and come up and snap to that point there as well. So this line that I just drew and that line there are starting to look an awful lot like a curved network where I have the border. You see where I'm going with this? Let me go ahead and trim off the part of that line that I don't need. There we go. I'll go ahead and explode these so they're 4 separate pieces. And then I may decide that I want this not to be a straight line along this edge, in which case I could take this and I could rebuild. Let's rebuild it by 3. That'll give me a point in the middle. I could take that point in the middle, move V for vertical, and we could drop it down. So it's essentially softening that arc instead of being a straight line. Okay, so now this curve plus this plus that curve there plus this curve there can become a curved network. So I'll go ahead and go up to Surface, Curved Network, and I'll say OK. And I've now modified the terrain in a seamless way, because I started with that projection, so that it flattens out in this little alcove, which was something I wanted. So the point is that you can trim out sections and you can cause something to kind of be adjusted as necessary. I have another problem with this model, and that is that right here I don't have enough below. I could build it out in this view, but I really need to go back to my original file, which was right here, and make the modification here. So there's that wall that's extending down. Let me create another little box from there to there, and we'll extend this one down. It doesn't need to go as far, but about like that. Then I can go ahead and I should double check that these are on the same layer. They are on the exterior concrete wall layer. So let's make sure it goes on the exterior concrete wall layer. I should spend a little bit of time going through and organizing this file. I can't seem to find the exterior concrete wall layer. There it is. Okay, so now that's on the same layer, which ultimately means it'll have the same material applied to it. I will save this, and then I'll jump over into my master site file. I'll go to Edit, and then Blocks, Block Manager. My retreat base is newer. I'll go ahead and say Update. I have to solve my material problems, which I will do. And there we go. It updated, and now that piece has been filled in. So the idea there is that you go back to your original, make the modification, and then come back to this view so that you can see it working. So that's good. I have that set up. The next piece of this is I need to figure out where I want to do my rendering of this particular building. So there's a kind of a nice view looking out this direction or so. So I can set up my view. The other thing that you can do is this view isn't a particularly wide-angle camera view. It's more of a telephoto camera view. With nothing selected, we'll cover this again when we get to the interiors, because that's when you definitely want a wider angle. With nothing selected, I can go to my Properties pane here, and I can change the lens length to be a little bit wider. So instead of doing a 50 millimeter, I could do like a 28. 28 is pretty good for an exterior shot. 18 is pretty good for an interior shot. It lets me have a little bit more in my perspective here. Maybe something like that. Might use pan a little bit to pull that down. And now I feel like I have a pretty good composition. This is looking like a pretty good view to ultimately be rendering. So I'm going to go ahead and save that view. I'll click the little downward triangle here for perspective. I'll go to Set View and then Named Views. And I'll go ahead and save this view as Exterior Render 01. The advantage of saving these rendered views is that you can, when you make modifications, it's easy to jump back to that same view and keep working from that particular piece. So at this point, I need to actually go through, and I know my building doesn't have the correct materials on it yet. I'll fix that. But I want to start thinking about what the materials should be for the site. And also, I don't currently have any kind of an ocean. I have nothing going out in space. So we're going to solve both of those problems next. The first thing would be the material on the site itself, right here. I'm going to modify that material by going into the Vray Asset Editor. I'm going to click over. Now, previously, in previous classes, I talked about some kind of fake grass-looking materials that never really looked that good. This new version of Vray does have some more advanced ground features. So we're going to go into the ground folder right here. We don't want asphalt, but they have a bunch of different grasses that are available to us. And you can play around with which one looks right. I'm going to start with this grass A, and we'll take a look at what that one looks like. I'll drag that one over, and then I want to apply that grass to this material, or this object. So we'll go ahead and apply to the layer. So I'll right-click and say Apply to Layer, and this is going to be on the Environment Terrain layer. And so now that's been applied. It's possible, if I switch to my rendered view, that the texture mapping is a little bit funky for it. You might even switch back into shaded and then jump over into the top view and then take a look at this view in rendered mode. And so as we're looking down on it, that grass looks like it's the texture's just too big. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. I'll go into my texture mapping. I'm going to apply a surface mapping to it. And then I'll come down here to the UVW repeat, and I'm going to increase that by a fair amount. Let's do maybe 15, and let's see how it looks. So it's already getting a little tighter. It might have to be more than that. Let's try 30. And at some point, the scale is going to start to feel right. Still not big enough. Let's try 60. And it might even be more like 100. There we go. We'll try that one and see. So I'm dealing with the texture mapping to try to make this feel right. So that's been applied to everything that's on this surface, but my texture mapping was just this big map. This little piece here didn't get texture mapped, so I need to go ahead and match the mapping. It says select source object, I'll match it to that one so that I get the same texture as it goes through. And I could see that if I switched over into rendered mode here. Oh, this wasn't on the terrain layer. Change object layer. Now that's going to match up. Or at least it should. Let me try that texture mapping one more time. Match mapping to this. And it's still not previewing very well, but we'll see when I go ahead and do the render whether it ends up working out. So I still don't have the ocean yet, though. And so the ocean is kind of a challenging one because we want to be able to render like this infinite plane of water, but we want to see waves in it. And I'm going to explore a little bit more with the new version of Vray to see if we can do something a little bit different. But the solution that I've found that works really nicely, I have this available for you on the course website. If you go to Resources and you go to Rhino Blocks Library, go to Landscape. I have a file called Ocean here. I also have, by the way, those of you that are doing Lake Tahoe, I have a file called Lake Tahoe that will give you all the terrain for Lake Tahoe. So you can bring that one in as well. I would download this Lake Tahoe terrain. It's better than the terrain that I gave you in the zip file. So I would work off of this Lake Tahoe terrain. Anyway, Ocean. What this is it's kind of like a giant, go ahead and download that so it's downloading. It's kind of like a giant plate. and it's flat in the middle and it curves up at the edges to try to blend into the horizon line. And so when I bring that in, you go ahead and show it, and I want to copy this over into today's folder so that I don't lose it. Go ahead and paste that one in. There it is. I'm going to bring that one in, so let me go to my piece here. I'm going to go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance again. And this time I'm going to be looking for that ocean file, that one. Go ahead and say Open. It's going to be linked as a reference, same thing. I still have my material issues, and we may find that it's easier to work in shaded mode. And I'll drop that plate in there. So it's really hard to tell. It looks like kind of just a big giant round disc. But if we looked at it carefully in the front and side views, you can see that there's some thickness to it. So it just curls on the edges a little bit. So I have to place that ocean in its correct placement. So let me go ahead and move V for vertical, and I'll drop that ocean down. And at some point, you'll be able to see the beach. So there you go. There's the beach. And we can adjust and decide where that beach really should be, right about there. Now if I switch back into my exterior render 1 view, we go to Set View, exterior render 1. There we go. Now I have this ocean that's acting as the ocean. I have to make sure my material works on this as well. Let me go into Vray. And I'm going to load the ocean material that I have. I don't know if they have a better water. Let's see under liquid. Oh, they have some waves. So maybe we'll try some waves from them. We'll try this waves 1. Doesn't look too bad. Let me go ahead and right click on it and say apply. Oh, I should have. Actually, I should do that in the ocean file itself. So let me go back. Here, let me open the ocean file. Perfect, there it is. I'm going to change the material on it. So let's go into the V-Ray options here. I'll move over. I'm going to go into liquid. And I'm going to look for the waves. We're going to try out this waves 1. There we go. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and delete the ocean material. Then I'll right click on the material, say apply to layer. It's going to be on the ocean layer. We'll go ahead and save it. I'll go to File and then Save. Then I can go over into my master site here. And I can reload that block. I'm going to go to Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. Ocean 1 linked file is newer. Let's go ahead and update that. Replace existing material. And there we go. We should see in my layers the ocean here. Yep, it already has the ocean material on it, so that should work out. If we switch over into the rendered mode, well, we're seeing that there is an ocean there. We'll see how it actually renders out in a little bit. So let me switch back into my shaded mode. The next piece of this is we need to bring in the background. So the sky system. So sun, sky, just like we did last 2 classes ago. So I'm going to go ahead and under the V-Ray quick rendering setups here, I'm going to work with that one that I was working on. Where is it? This basic day scene 4. That was the one I was working on before. It's from the Bob Grothius site. It's his HDRI 005. So I'm going to go ahead and load that one in, and then I'll reference my settings here in just a second. So we'll go into my master site file, and I'm going to start by bringing those pieces in. So first thing, we'll go into the V-Ray Asset Editor. we're going to jump over into my settings, and then we'll go into environment here. I'm going to right click on the little checkerboard and say clear, then I'll click on it again. I'm going to choose a bitmap, and I'm going to go into my flash drive, into my Vray folder, into Vray HDRI, and it's 005, there it is. I'm going to choose the reference file here, which is the background. Go ahead and say OK. There it is. Under my texture placement, I'm going to change my channel into environment. The rest of this all seems OK. Then under the environment overrides, under GI Skylight, I'm going to turn it on and assign a bitmap. This one is going to be the blurry version, the ENV version. Same thing under texture placement. I'm going to change my texture placement to environment, and then we can say back. So I now have my background and my environmental overrides. I need to go ahead and set my sun, but I also need to reference what the background value should be. I think it was 40. 15. Oh, I have to do my horizontal rotation too. 140.4 for my horizontal rotation. This was 15. And my horizontal rotation, 140.4. Back. And this one here was also at 140.4. All right, that was at 15. My camera was set at 14. So I have to go back and double check. I haven't updated these yet, so you can't just download them and load it in. So I'm working on it. Okay, that's on. Perfect. San Francisco. So we'll do San Francisco on 9/3/2019 at 13:13 p.m. with daylight savings on. So we'll go here, and our sun. I'm going to go ahead and come up here to the Vray toolbar, and I'm going to choose the sun icon. This opens the sun angle calculator. We're going to specify San Francisco. There it is. And then our date and time, it's going to be 9/3, and our time would be 13:13 with daylight savings time turned on. I'll go ahead and say OK, and then I can drop the sun onto the building like that. So now I have the sun, I have the background environment. It's time to go ahead and perform the first test render. So I'll go into my Vray, and under my output here, under my render output, I'm going to make sure that this is pretty small initially. So I'm going to change my aspect ratio to match the viewport. So what I see in the viewport is exactly what I'm going to get in the rendering. And then I'm going to adjust the size. We'll say maybe 100 there by 226. That seems like a reasonable place to start on my rendering. So before I do that, let me go ahead and save everything, just in case I get a crash. And then we'll go ahead and start a little test render. And this is where you kind of see, are my settings working? So it looks like I'm still having some issues with the grass. That needs to be adjusted. And then my waves are working for some of it, but not working for all of it. So I'm going to add an infinite plane below the waves to give them something to reflect off of, because right now they're reflecting part of the ground, etc. So let me go ahead and add a Vray infinite plane into my scene. Which is right there. I think, right? There it is. And I need to make sure that it is at the correct height. So I'm going to move it so that it's just below where my ocean is. Come on. There we go. So it's just below my ocean. We'll go back into this render view, the infinite plane. Let me create a new sublayer here for infinite plane. And we'll change the object layer. And then we can go ahead and render again. And that's why I always render small, because I want to make sure that as it starts to work, it looks right, it doesn't look right, etc. So I'm still struggling a little bit with the ocean. I may have to play around with it a little bit to get the right settings. I might need to make the ocean black to get the reflection. I might need to make it blue, the infinite plane, I mean. So I'll work through what those settings are. Alternatively, you could load in the infinite plane, or the water, the ocean material that I typically use, which seems to work nicely in this context. So I'm going to work through that. I don't want to make you guys sit here and watch me fine-tune these and make the corrections. The point is, today you should be working more on your model, get it further along, work through getting it into the site, pick where it's going to go on the site, make sure you have that master site file that you can start performing the test renderings in, set up one exterior view. This is what you're going to post today at the end. So even if your building's just masked, even if it's just gray, that's fine. I just want to see that you've got it set up, you've got your view set up, you're ready to start that rendering process. There are other things that I mentioned in here. I think we'll come back to those, like adding rocks and grass and whatever. We'll come back to that stuff a little bit later on, because you don't need to worry about that yet. So concentrate on getting this further along, keep the design development going, and then we'll get this in. And like I said, I'll solve what the problem is with their ocean so that we can get a good result out of it.